Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yesterday,
Yeah, good morning.
yesterday we discussed, right? After installing the SQL server, the major important check is we need to set the SQL server max memory. Okay, so the max memory how we defined 20% to operating system and 80% to SQL server. And if you have multiple instances on the one computer or one virtual machine, then how we need to decide? If we have multiple SQL instances, then we have to allocate, we have to adjust the 80% of memory to the available SQL server on that particular virtual box. Based upon the criticality and the priority of the customers, we have to set it max memory from here. Instance, go to properties, then go to memory, then we have to set it here. So right now I allocated a SQL server max memory to this particular instance 10 GB. That means this SQL server can go and utilize up to 10 GB, not more than that. So initially what it will do, it will start using the memory from 0 MB to, and keep on, it will add the memory to the, this provide the memory to this SQL server. Once it reach 10 GB, it won't grow further. And as well as by default, it won't remove the pages from memory. Whenever we require the kind of a memory pressure, whenever we require a new table to get more pages, at that time the pages will flush from this memory and it will allocate the new pages. That is a funda for the SQL server memory. Generally, we can see the SQL server memory always 80 to 90%. That means the SQL server really won't use, but certain point of time it went up to 0 to the max memory. After that, it won't come down. It will stay there only, but it will use means it will reuse based upon the queries. Yesterday Sandeep asked, right, how can we define memory to particular database? The particular database, we cannot define the memory to the individual database. Once we assign the memory to the SQL server, the server level, that memory is shared for all the databases under the SQL server. Based on the usage, based on the load, it will take memory from the SQL server. Here, suppose here I assigned 10 GB memory. In that, any one of the database may take all the memory. At that time, other customers or other database will go slow down. So at that time, we need to tune the SQL server and database why that particular database is taking more memory. The tuning part is a different concept. We have, before tuning, we need to understand several areas. The tuning part will go last like a performance tuning part. But you have one system DMV, like system underscore sys dot dm underscore os underscore buffer underscore description. This is a one system view. Using this view, what it will do, it will provide the buffer cache from the SQL server that will provide the past history, how much memory previously that particular database using. Using this, we'll come to know at least this database is taking this much of memory from the SQL server. Now, this is the memory part. Memory part we can discuss later. But the most important thing is like once we install the SQL server, how we are going to define or assign. The thumb rule is like 20% we need to leave it operating system. Remaining 80% we have to adjust. That may be one SQL server, or maybe that may be multiple SQL server instance. We have to adjust.
Sir, what if it extends more than 10 GB?
It won't extend. It won't extend. If you need more than 10 GB, what will happen? The SQL server will get like application will get a timeout, and we can see the error, the memory out of boundaries. So that is
Okay.
the reason,
So,
like we have to define the memory max. If you not define the max memory, what it will do? It will take the memory, what are the we have on that particular computer. Suppose like if I did not define, if I leave the default value, the default value like a 2 TB. If I left the default value, what it will do? It will try to utilize the entire memory which is available on that particular computer or node.
okay, in between, you said like 2 TB, right?
Mhm.
So I realized later that I'm using 2 TB. So at the time, can I change it as well?
You see, this value we can change it without restarting of the SQL server. Okay, thus suppose here I have one more default instance. If I go for memory, this is the 2 TB. So if I change the value here, what will happen? It will flushes the pages. Like last week we discussed, right? What is the page?
Mhm.
So generally what will happen whenever you run the query, what will happen? The query first will look for the buffer cache. If the page is available, then it will give the data to the user. If the page is not available, what it will do? It will interact with the disk, and it will keep the page in the buffer cache, and parallelly the page will keep in the transaction log, and modification will happen on the buffer cache pages and as well as the transaction log. So if you change the value here, what will happen? Those pages will flushes from memory. If the pages are flushes from the memory, what will happen? The buffer cache, it will store the plants and as well as the data pages. So those will be flushed out. Whenever the new query comes, it has to fetch new query from the disk and it has to keep in the buffer cache. That time,
Okay.
that
Okay.
time
Then initially we have to keep it like a 10 GB, right?
a 10
Whenever
GB,
we start the
not a fundamental 10 GB. That too depends upon the how application the required the memory. So here I have a three instance. In that I kept for 10 GB for one instance and remaining I didn't keep. While keeping the memory settings, we need to consider the application behavior and how many users will connect to that particular. So by considering that, the thumb rule is we have to leave it 20 percentage operating system. Remaining you have to decide.
okay.
So
Okay.
yesterday, like we discussed at a wall, right? Uh,
Yes, sir. Sir, one more doubt. You said like 20% to the operating system and 80% to the SQL server, right?
yes, yes, exactly.
Yes. Okay. If it is like a 20%, so I mean 80%, 1.6 GB, right?
Uh,
So I have like a 10 instances,
uh,
right? So for that, I have to maintain like I mean, how much we can get it?
like remaining that 80 percentage, we have to
Huh.
calculate, we have to adjust. Okay.
Yes, right.
If it is
So
not sufficient, we have to go for that particular computer or that particular node, we have to upgrade the memory.
okay,
So the memory will comes like the series, like 4 GB, 8 GB, 16 GB, 32 GB, 64 GB, 128 GB, and 256 GB, 512 GB, like that.
Okay, we have to increase the memory.
Increase the memory of the particular computer.
Okay, whenever the instances are increased.
Yeah, the thumb
Okay.
rule is like we should not keep multiple instances, but sometimes, as per the business requirement, we will keep. Why? Because to reduce the license cost. So the license cost it will take if I install one SQL server, if I install 50 SQL server, the license cost will be same. Okay.
Okay.
So that is the reason what the business will do. One particular computer will install multiple instances. Okay, so that we can save the cost. But if the project or customer is a very high level secure, then we should not keep multiple instances in the one particular computer. Why? Because that is a some security violations. We can discuss about when we discussing about the SOC. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So now memory side, you got some clear, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got clear.
Yeah. So yesterday we discussed about the system database. Okay. In the system database, we covered master database. Now we are going to cover remaining system databases. Yeah. So the system database means like whenever we install the SQL server, there are few database will create to maintain and to store that particular SQL server information to provide proper functioning and management purpose. The system database will create. So master database we discussed. Now we are going to discuss about the model. What is the purpose of the model database? The model database purpose is like whenever we creating the new user database, that user database will take the functionalities from the model database. So the model database we can call like a the template of the database. That means suppose if I create the new database, what it will do? It will take some properties from the model database. Think about like a child. When the child got a birth, the child will take the properties from the his parents. Okay. So like a surname and remaining other properties like how many like what I meant to say uh, uh, some personal data, those will get it from our parent side. Like that, whenever we creating the new database will take properties from the model database. So the mainly the properties it will take like a the collision setting and other if you create any tables by default, those table also will come and let me show here. If I create a new database, what it will do whenever creating the new database, first in the background, it will go to interact to the model database. Then it will check what is the recovery model of the model database. Then it will take it here. The recovery model is simple. Right now here, what is this one?
Sir.
Tell me.
Yeah, yeah. 1 second. I mean, I got another doubt. Previously, we discussed about the RAM, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, sir. You showed like a 2 TB, right?
Yes, yes.
That is a RAM or storage?
No, no, RAM. The
Oh, 2
storage will
TB.
come to the disk. Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
Storage
yeah.
come to the disk.
That is the. I mean, I got some doubt initially, so that's the reason I made it.
So we can no need to check in the MS Info 32. Instance, right click, properties. If you go like that, in the general page, we can see here. Okay. How many process we have, how much memory we have. Okay. If I go MS Info 32 or system information, the same information we can see the memory and process which are available on the computer. Okay.
Okay.
So accordingly, this one we can change it. What are the, if you see here memory, right? This belongs to the memory, not for the storage.
Okay.
Yeah. So here, this is the model database properties. Like if you go here, right click, model and properties. Okay. So this model database, if you go for options, this model database collision is SQL underscore Latin underscore general underscore CP1 and CA underscore EAS. This value, whenever we installing the SQL server software, right, at that time we have to select the collision, right? Those collision value here. Okay. And the collision will apply to the model database. And as well as the recovery model, right now, it is a simple. These two properties, it will apply to the new user database. Right click, new database. In that new database, I am providing like a Adi. When I give the Adi, it is taking like the logical names like Adi underscore log. The file extension will create .mdf and .ndf. Now the properties where it will apply here. If you go for options, the collision is a default. The default means it will take the collision setting properties from the model database. And also the recovery model, it will take properties from what I mean to say, model database. So here the collision setting for the database level also, we can change it. But the thing is like, as per the Microsoft tool, we have to maintain the same collision setting in the server level, in the database level. If you keep default, the collision settings will be the same as the SQL Server model database. Let me click OK. It is taking longer time. Come on. No, I did not restart my laptop. Model database locked. Okay. Let me wait. Create file database. Did I open model database here? Let me close here. See, now it created. Previously, whenever creating the new database, what was happen? It is try to fetch the details from model database, but in the model database, I opened some properties, right? At that time, the database get locked. So that is the reason when I'm creating the new database, that was not able to create. So here, what is that means like whenever creating the new database, that will take properties from the model database. That is the definition of the model database, and that is the purpose of the model database. The model database serves as a template for all new user defined database. Whenever we create a new database created, the SQL Server copies the content of the model database for the new database, including system tables and default objects and default options of the model database. Suppose here, let me change the database properties here. I will change the model database properties to full recovery model. I will explain what is the recovery models. Right now, I'm changing the one default value. So model database by default, the recovery model is simple. We need to keep as a full. I will explain why, what is the important to keep the full recovery model. So right now I'm going to change the recovery model for model database from simple to full. So always go for script like a T-SQL. It will provide what is happening in the background. Now I'm clicking, click OK. That is okay. So like alter database name, set recovery equal to full. Right now I changed the model database recovery model as a full. Just click it and now go to right click and try to create a new database. Okay. Go for options. See the recovery model, what is showing? Full. Previously it showed as a simple, but now it's showing as a full. Why? Because we changed the model database properties, the recovery model simple to full. So that is the reason the recovery model is changing for the new database, not for the existing database. I will tell you. Go for Adi. The one always we have to keep. Yes. Yes. So if you go for Adi database properties, go for options. This is the full. Why? Because after changing the recovery model, we created the new database. If I go for Adi database, if you go for properties, if you go for options, the recovery model simple. That means the model database properties will affect for only for whenever you're creating the new database. It won't affect for the existing database. That is the purpose of the model database and usage. So we have another databases called MSDB. This MSDB mainly used for automation purpose and to store the some high availability called log shipping and replication and log shipping replication and one more high availability. It will store those information. Moreover, the SQL Server agent, the SQL Server agent related jobs information will stored in the MSDB. Apart from that, MSDB, it will store the information for the backup information and restore information. Suppose like I have several databases. If I perform any backup of the user database or system databases, those backup information will stored in the MSDB. Like when was the backup was taken, which database it was taken, the and which location the backup was taken, and which user the backup was taken, the how long the backup was taken to complete. Those information will stored in the MSDB. Apart from that, it will store the information of the restore. Right now, see if you see in my database, one database is restoring. So if a restoring means like the database is restoring from the backup, right? So this restore information, like it will store like which user restored this database and when this database was restored and which database or which server this database taken the backup and restored, and those information will stored in the MSDB. In that MSDB, we have a few tables like a restore file list only and backup history. We have several tables. In that several tables, backup will stored in the backup table and the restore information will stored in the restore history. If we go for system tables, here the backup information will stored in the like a backup file group and the backup media, the backup media set. In this table, the backup information it will stored. I mentioned like some high availability like log shipping. The log shipping is one of the legacy database high availability. Log shipping information also will stored in the MSDB. And restore history. Using this restore history table, we can come to know what are the databases restored, this SQL server, when it is restored, and some other information. And one more table called like jobs. Yeah. So one more is like a database mail. So we have a critical component called database mail. That database mail, what it will do, it will interact with the SQL server and send the notifications to the Outlook or some other like communications, like the jobs are succeed or failure from the SQL server. If you want to communicate, uh, then we require the database mail. That database mail information also it is stored in the MSDB. And one more, if I go here, sys.sys jobs, where it is. Jobs. Sys jobs. So using this particular table, uh, it will store the what are the jobs we created in the SQL server. So here the SQL server having agent will do a lot of automations. If I want to run particular job, for that we can provide the some task and the some code, and we can schedule it. Those information also it will stored in the MSDB. Like when was the job was started, and what is the last schedule time, and when was the job is succeed. Those information will stored in the MSDB. That means like the MSDB will use for scheduling and automation information which will stored in the MSDB. That is the purpose of the MSDB. Is that Microsoft is telling? The MSDB is primarily used for SQL Server agent scheduling jobs, alerts, and operators. It also store information of the database backups and restore database mail and service broker. So whenever the people asking what is the purpose of MSDB means, we can tell like MSDB is one of the system databases. The MSDB is mainly used for to store the SQL Server agent information, like scheduling the jobs information and jobs information and alert information, and also it will store the backups, restore, and as well as the other availability called log shipping and replication and database mail information. It will stored in the MSDB. So backups and restore, log shipping, replication, jobs, we can see the coming sessions and we can understand what is the job and how can you create and how to schedule it and how to alerting and how to take the database backup and how to restore. Once we do that, we can get that information from the MSDB. Now we have a one more database, temp database. Sorry. The temp database. So the temp database is the one of the system databases. The temp database is used for to store the temporary objects and temporary stored processes, and store the ad hoc queries which are coming to the SQL server. Okay. The temp database, the thing is like it won't store any user information. It won't store any system critical information, but it is a critical database. Why? Because it will store the ad hoc query information. It will store temporary objects. which are required for the user database. Sometimes the users, what they will do, they will create the temporary tables. Those temporary tables, it will use for ad hoc purpose. The temporary tables they won't create on the user database, but they will create in the temp database and they will fetch the data from the temporary database. Once their work is done, they will drop the temporary tables. And some stored procedures also, it will like ad hoc stored procedures and some other information, it will store temporary, not for permanent. Whenever we restart the SQL server, whatever the data stored in the temp database, that will be gone. Why? Because that is not a user permanent data, that is a temporary purpose to help the user database and to help the some system level operations. Like whenever you were performing the rebuild operations, whenever you performing the bulk operations, those will be stored temporarily in the temp database. Once we restart the SQL server, what are the pages and what are the data stored in the temp database, those will be gone. That is the reason the temp database, we cannot take the backup. So interview, they will ask, can we take the temp database backup? The answer is no. And while installing the SQL server, I said the temp database is very critical. We need to configure the temp database, right? So what is that means? So temp DB configuration means like we have to create the data files based upon the SQL server course available on that particular computer. If we go for instance properties, it will tell how many process or how many cores available on this particular computer or this particular node or this particular virtual machine. So right now I have 4 process. That means in the system database, if you go for temp database, go for properties. If you go for files, I need to create 4 data files. Okay. And this temp database, we need to keep different disk other than the system user database we need to keep. Why? Because this temp database will store the temporary objects. Sometimes the temp database will grow very huge. So because of that, we need to keep this temp database to the different disk other than the user database we are keeping. Suppose like my computer, my node having 8 cores. That scenario, I can create the data files up to 8. Suppose my computer having more than 8 cores, then what we need to do? So as per the Microsoft, we need to create the data files up to 8. After that, we will decide, do we really require to create the more data files? And we have to go for some analysis, then we have to create. What are we to say? So the computer having here 32 cores or 40 cores. That time, are we going to create 30 files? Are we going to 40 files? No. Initially, we'll go to create the files up to 8. After that, we will decide can we create or not. But the deciding factor will depends upon the PFS space, page free space. So we can explain in the coming section. We have a topic called temp database content. So temp database content means like this database always will busy to perform the ad hoc queries. If the temp database is very busy, what will happen? The user database and the SQL server will respond very slow. So at that time, the thumb rule is we need to verify how many files we created how the data is flushing from the temp database, and is there any weight types is coming, we have to tune it. Those part we can go for temp DB contention. But right now we are discussing about the what is the temp database. The temp database is the one of the system database. The temp database will store the temporary objects, and it will store the any bulk operations which are performing, and it will store the uh, some ad hoc stored procedure information. It will store. If I go for the definition, the temp database used to store temporary user objects. The user objects the user will create, but those objects won't permanently store in the user database, but that will store in the temp database. Once their work is done, those tables will be dropped. And the temp database, it stored the internal objects created by the database engine. What is the database engine? Database engine nothing but a SQL server. So here sort runs and hash joins, like whenever we creating the running the query, that will create some execution plan. In that execution plan, it will prepare the path. In that path, we can see what are the sorts are we used and what are the joins are using. So that ad hoc information, it will stored in the temp database. And one more important feature called like a row versioning. Okay, that row versioning will come to the picture that whenever we going to use the database isolation level called like a read committed snapshot isolation level. At that time, row version will come and it will use. I will explain that what is the row versioning and how can we minimize the locking of the user sessions. At that time, we will discuss about the row versioning. Why? Because like yesterday we discussed what is the default collision setting, not collision setting, the default isolation level. The default isolation level is read committed, but we have one more isolation level is called read committed snapshot isolation level. If you use read committed snapshot isolation level, at that time the user operations will use the row versioning to reduce the locking. So right now, just you can read the temp database and what is the purpose of temp database. That's it. But later, once you complete the half of the course, you understand what is the row versioning, or what is the indexing, and what is the temporary objects. You can understand. This is the temp database. So we have one more database called like a resource database. This resource database, if you go to here, if you go to system databases, we cannot see that particular system databases, but that system databases will be stored in the are created in the binary locations. So these system databases, like resource database, is invisible, but it will store some critical information for like sys views. That information will help whenever you applying the SQL Server patches. At that time, those patches will directly apply to that resource database. Then after that, it will apply to the SQL Server engine.
Sir, this system databases are default databases.
Yes, correct, exactly.
Okay.
So the default databases means like if I installed one more instance, those databases will come by default. So we have to explain. The interview will ask, what are the system databases? Can you explain? We need to start explaining like master model temp database, and we have to explain resource database, and we have to explain one more called distribution database. So resource database is like we cannot see here, but the database will be the database files will be created in this particular SQL Server binaries. So here what is telling? Yeah, the resource database is hidden database. It's kind of like a read-only database. We cannot modify the data for resource database. Why? Because it is invisible and it was hidden. We can see only for physical file information. The read-only database that contains all the system objects that are physically stored in the sys schema. So if you here, see here, this is the sys schema. The query is running on the master. So the logically, the data is pointing to the master, but the physically, it will pointing to the resource database. One more. Select install. Sys dot. Sys database. See, yesterday what I said, that system database, like user database and system database, the store the information on the master, right? But the logically, the database will be stored, but the mere content and the sys schema, this schema information, it will store the resource database. That is telling, okay. It is not visible in the SQL Server Management Studio. So let me go here. Here also it's not showing. Select start. Sys dot. Sys. Alright, files. Sys dot sys all. Here we can see number 32767. See, the database ID 32767. That is the last number database. That is the call like a resource database. If you go here, if you keep it here, see, MS SQL system resource, right? But this database is not visible in the system database list, but that will be stored in the root directory, like MS SQL system resource .mdf.ldf. Then interview will ask what is the last database ID and what is that number. That number is like a 32767. Yesterday we discussed, right? We can create the databases. The number is 32767.
Sir, is that the instance?
Sorry?
No, 32767 is the instances.
No, database count. Like I mentioned right here, in this particular instance, we can create up to 32767 databases.
Okay,
The
under
instances,
one databases, we can create 32767
databases. We can create up
database.
to 32766. Why? Because 32767 already allocated for resource database, right? We can create up
Okay,
to 3276. Okay.
okay. Instances are 50 max.
Instances are 50 or 49 named instance. One is default instance.
Okay, one is default and 49 are the created by ourselves.
Yeah. So
Okay,
the system that
32767 are the under one instance.
yes, understand.
Okay,
So
got it.
the same number will applicable for the database data files. How many files we can create? 32767. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So here the other thing is like the database ID. the interview will ask, what is the master database ID? That is 1. And temp database, what is the ID? 2. And what is the model database ID? 3. And what is the MSDB database ID? The 4. So this number won't change. Why? Because these are the default databases. Whenever we creating the user database, this number will be vary. Why? Because we will create the database and we will delete the database, right? So accordingly, the number will be allocated here. So here, the user databases ID will be here. Now we can move it to the one more database called distribution database. Okay, the distribution database won't come by default whenever we installing the SQL server. The distribution database will come whenever we configure the replication database availability. At that time, we can able to see the database here. That database is called like a distribution. That distribution, it will store the information about the replication and that replication related commands, the replication related agents. Those information will stored in the distribution, like a distribution database. So we can clearly go through it when we configure the high availability called like a replication. At that time, we can see it. Okay. Right now, I did not configure any replication. That is the reason we are not able to see that particular database. But whenever interview asks, the first main thing is like we have to explain master, model, MSDB, TempDB, and resource database. And later you have to explain we have one more database called distribution. The distribution will come whenever the replication configured. That is for the system databases. So right now you have any doubts for system databases? Because we have to understand what is the purpose of the system databases. If something goes wrong, this any one of these particular databases, SQL Server won't come online, or maybe functionality won't work. So here master database is corrupted. The SQL Server won't start. Model database is corrupted. SQL Server won't start. And TempDB corrupted. SQL Server won't start. MSDB corrupted. The SQL Server will start. It will work. But the SQL Server agent functionalities, it won't work properly. So we have to maintain healthy for the system databases, because these are the core and it will store this particular database engine information. If those databases not come online or not properly healthy, this database will affect. Why? Because the database engine itself, it won't start. Do you have
Sir,
any
can
doubts?
we rename that
No,
or
the master database, model database, MSDB database,
not
temp
this,
database.
the top one, the instance.
Instance, we can rename it. Okay. So instance, we can rename it using the SP drop server and SP rename server. Okay.
Okay.
We can rename it. But the thing is like if you configure the replication, that time renaming the SQL Server instance will get a problem. So generally, when we go for renaming, like I have this computer, like I have this virtual machine. The Windows team, what they will do, this will take entire this VM backup and restoring into the different environment, and they will rename the computer. Okay. At that time, what we need to do, we have to rename the SQL server inside instance as well. I will show you how to rename the SQL server instances. That is rare cases, but that we need to know how to rename the SQL Server instance. Why? Because this will help whenever we perform the DR operations or whenever we restore an entire this image to the another network or maybe another data center. That time, once we restore the computer, it will come to this computer name only. Yeah. This computer name will come. So Windows team, what they will do, once they restore this computer, they will they will rename this computer name. Once they rename it, if you try to get the what is the instance name, like it. Sorry. So it is providing like this computer name and as well as instance name. If once you rename it also, it will show the old name. So because of that, we have to change the name in the system catalog. So for that, we have to drop this instance and we have to rename it and we have to restart the SQL server. Then only this new instance name will apply in the system catalog. You clear it, Manas?
Yes, sir. Got cleared.
Yeah. So then one more thing is like the interview, the tricky interview will ask. Okay. The thing is like if you restart the SQL server, what are the database will come online? Okay. So suppose like I have this SQL server, kind of a lab. So if what I'm going to do, I'm going to shut down the service and I'm going to start it. Once I start it, in this particular databases, which database will come online? Okay, which database will listen once you started the services. So I will show you how to do it. The master database will come online, but I will show you here only. SQL. And one more thing is like I told you, right? Whenever we restart the SQL server, when we reboot the SQL server instance, the temp database will create, right? So if I go here, so start out of files. Maybe decode. It's not giving the when I was created. Okay, I have to go for sp underscore update. It's not giving exact time. If I go for so just I'm checking when was the temp database created. Okay, so here if you restart the SQL server, the creation of the date it will show like a new, because whenever you restart in the SQL server, the dump database will create freshly, not for other databases. If I go for properties, if I go for options, I think go for files. Yeah. So the date created is like 22/08/2022. Like this is the timings.
Sir, how it has been executed, it is showing error, right?
Where
The
where
fourth
which one?
line.
Which one? This one 4 line.
Yeah, fourth line. Red line is there, right? How it has executed?
So let me check. It's showing like a syntax error, but let me check. It's a really syntax error or not. It's not a really error, okay? But generally, like we can pass it, we'll come to know what is the error. If we show any syntax error, we can see like this red mark. Just showing here. It is telling like incont Sirax slash incont Sirax in Casimir SP underscore help DB. But it is showing like a error, but the query is correct only.
Okay.
But sometimes, like if you have any query, if you want to check it, like generally what we will do, you can go here, we can go for this tick mark. This tick mark, it will tell the query is properly syntaxically created or not. If you see any error, what we can do, we'll come to here the error, you have to double click. Then automatically the cursor will move to that particular error.
Okay.
Yeah. So now the temp database created this particular timing. Okay. Two things you need to observe. Once we restart the SQL server, what are the database is listening first and what is the temp database creation timing. Okay. So I'm going to restart the lab instance. If I go for restart, what will do? It will stop the services and it will start the service. Once you stop and start, what it will do? What are the databases? The server we have, this database will go offline and will come online. In the background, it will happen. And also parallelly, it will perform some CheckDB operations. Once your database go offline, while coming to the online, the SQL server by default, it will check some few checks. The database is like a properly data is computed from transaction log to MDF or not. Like a check, it will perform some CheckDB operations and it will go for some redo operations like offline and online. In between, it will perform some operations. The SQL server is restarted. Let me close it. Sorry. Just refresh. Now go to databases, then go to system database, then tempdb, right click, properties, take the time. See, now time is like 29th, 8th, 8 a.m. So that means whenever we restart the SQL server, this database will recreate. So that is the reason what are the data like stored, the data will be gone. Okay. And that is the reason we are not taking any backups. So the interview will ask one question. How can we know when was the SQL server restarted? So by looking at the temp database creation, we can tell that a particular time this SQL server instance is restarted. So here, by looking at the temp database creation, we'll tell that that a particular instance is restarted. That is the one interview question. Like a note down. Like how can you know when was the SQL server restarted? The answer is like by looking at the temp database creation time, we'll come to know that is that time the SQL server is restarted. The another question is like why the reason the SQL server is restarted? That is different troubleshoot. That may be a Windows problem, that may be some network problem, that may be somebody do manually, or maybe CPU is pressure, the SQL server is unexpectedly restarted. That's kind of a separate investigation. But the question is like, how can you know when was the SQL server restarted? The answer is by temp database creation. And like after restarting, how can you know which database comes online? So for that, how we need to check? Like if you want to do some basic logging checks. So for that, we have a command like xp underscore read error log. Using that error log, we can see like it will record the some basic information. When was the backup happen? Is there any login failure happen? Is there any memory dumps are happening? And those information will be stored in the error log. That error log, how can we read it? Open new query and type xp underscore read error log. If you type this, see, we got error. Like if you double, it's pointing here. So spelling mistake. ERRO error log. If you type read error log, it will provide the some information. Okay. If you come here, you can slowly move the cursor. It will provide what is the mode of the authentication of the SQL server. We configured SQL server authentication as a mixed authentication. And it is providing what is the service account we assign to the this particular SQL server. Here, the service database, what is the service account we provided. See here, we are getting this error log, right? This error log, the physically where it is stored. Those information, like if you run this command, it has to store and it has to give the information, right? So where that information is stored, this information in the physically, those information stored in the it will show here the logging information. Okay, using this error log, we are getting this output. So here, see here, once we restart the SQL server, the master database will start. After that, remaining databases will start accordingly. Based upon the like redo and undo operations, the recovery pages it has to complete. But initially, the master database will start. So this is the some interview will ask. Once we restart the SQL server, which database will comes online? The answer is master. Then how can we know that? So that we have to tell the master database definition, and as well as by looking at the error log, the first startup database is master. So after that, a few databases storing. This database we cannot visible. This database is giving from the 2022 onwards. Previously, we don't have like a replicated master and those information. These are kind of like a new feature came from the 2022. If you go for 2019 or 2016, we won't see other extra databases. These databases we cannot see here, but the cycles are internally it will maintain. So the second database like model and MSDB, and later will go for TempDB. So sometimes temp database will go for start for second, and model database will go first, like that. But the first database is master. So here, suppose like we want to do some troubleshoot. Okay, this error log file we are not able to run the command here. So in this scenario, how can we know this particular SQL server error log where it is going? So here, once I connect to the SQL server and I can able to see the where it is going. Sometimes what will happen? This SQL server won't start. Okay. So at that time, where we need to start troubleshoot. If you want to start troubleshoot, we need to read this error log, right? So how can you read it? If it SQL server is not itself starting, how can you read it? So for that, what we need to do, we need to get this error log file where the physical is stored. So for that, what we need to do, go to configuration manager. Then we have to go for startup parameters. Then go to configuration manager. Then go to services. Then go to that particular server. So SQL server is stopped. Then how can you here we can see kind of some red mark. Right now all SQL servers are running. Here suppose the SQL server lab instance is stopped. It is not starting. If you start also, it is not starting. So we want to troubleshoot why it is stopped. What is the reason to stop? So for that, we need to check this error log. This error log, it will record why it is stopped. But here it is itself not starting. How could we read it? So for that, come here, go to SQL server services, then go to that instance, then right click, then go to properties. You have to go for some startups. Then go to startup parameters. In that startup parameters, we can see the E. The E means the error log information. What are the logs that coming here? It will show that physical information where it is stored. The error log is storing here. So go to this particular SQL server. The error log is going to this particular location. See SQL, M drive, and log. Let me go here. See here. Using this physical file name, we are getting the data here. So here, you can right click and open the data. So here, we can see the information. What are the seeing we here? What are the seeing in the information? Those information we can see here itself. So we can check this on information, and we can start troubleshooting if we see any errors. Sometimes the SQL server won't start because of that master database not accessible, or temp database is not accessible, and sometimes this is the very important service level principle. Whenever you installing the SQL server, there one service level principle name will register on the domain controller. So sometimes this service level principle name will go for duplicate. If you have any duplicate names, at that time, whenever you restart the SQL server, the SQL server won't start. So for that, we need to start some troubleshoot. Those all information will stored in this error log. So the first point of the troubleshooting, we need to check the error log. The error log will be stored in the disk. If you want to go to that particular disk, then we have to go to the startup parameters in the configuration manager. 5 minutes. In the configuration manager, then you have to go for instance, then go to properties, then go for look for the error log information, then you have to go and check it. This is the one of the troubleshoot to investigate from the starting point. Here any doubts? Like how to check the error log file, where it is stored, and what is the purpose of the error log. The error log purpose is to record the errors which are and some information related to the SQL Server. This information we can get it from SQL Server new query in the Object Explorer, or we can get it from the physical disk, which are stored. Let me stop recording. Then we'll go for dots.